So tonight she's going to talk about the photographic journey of a lifelong
Dilettante.
Dilettante.
Yeah, sorry, I knew I was going to mess up that word. Anyway, been really looking forward to it, and so Jennifer, you're on.
Okay, now this worked when we tried it in practice. Now I'm going to try to make it work again. All right, there's that. There's that. There's that. Ah, it didn't go to the right spot. Oh.
Looks good.
All right.
Just go left there.
Here.
A few clicks to go left. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
I discovered as I was practicing this earlier with Bill that I've given my talk like 2 or 3 different names. I mean, they all essentially say the same thing. But anyway, on this slideshow, it's a dilettante finds photography. And mostly I'm looking back at what I have done. And at the end, I'm going to look forward to what I still want to accomplish. And okay. So when I joined the photography club, I didn't have any experience. You know, I just came in. My very first meeting, which is what Kate's doing right now, my very first meeting was someone's master's presentation.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So I came in, I didn't know, I remember really, I'm embarrassed now how out of it I was, but they were setting up, this is when we were meeting in person, they were setting up screens and there was this beautiful picture. And I said, oh, I want to take a picture like that. And someone said, oh, that's just a screensaver for the computer. And it was like, oh, geez, I thought it was somebody in the club who took the picture. Anyway, so this presenter comes up and he said, well, you know, I've been going through all this. And when I first started in the club, I asked myself, what kind of a photographer am I? And he said he went through several things, but what he finally decided he was a wildlife photographer. And then he went on to show some incredible photos from safaris in Africa and places like that with, you know, some really exotic wildlife. And then he did a little educational thing about how he got several different shots. And wow, you know, I just came out of that thinking, holy cow, well, I don't know what kind of photographer I am or what I'm going to be, but you know, I figure I'll find out. And so now it's 7 years later, and I still really can't answer that question. You know, I think about different members of the club, and we all photograph lots of different things, but if I mention a name, I bet half the people in the club will come up with the same answer. Like Mike Funk, you know, you think Mike Funk? I mean, I just think street photography and sports events. I mean, those 2 things he's really spent a lot of time on. He does many other things, but those are, when I think about Trisha, you know, abstract. In fact, if an abstract picture comes up on the screen, you can hear a few people say, oh, that's probably Trisha. And Bill, you know, you think Bill Stacy, he likes action photography, you know, especially things like polo and race cars and boats, you know, just these really exciting action photos. And then Anne, you know, Anne does these gorgeous flowers and botanical things, mushrooms, and just super stuff like that. You know, Linda does these fabulous landscapes, a lot of them from Montana, where she used to live. And Pat Carlson has all these travel photos, and Herb has landscape and wildlife photos from exotic places that are really interesting. Anyway, I could go on and on. I'd mention each person. Oh, Sherry, who's here, she does incredible portraits and of people and of animals. And anyway, so I'm thinking, what am I good at? And I started looking back at things that I've done. But first of all, I came across a definition of 2 words that I thought applied to me. And so these two words I've kind of lived with. The first one is amateur. And amateur now has a kind of a pejorative connotation. If you're an amateur, you're not thought to be particularly good. Although our club does state that it's for amateur photographers. And this word comes from the Latin amare, to love. And it originally referred to a person who loved what they did. So an amateur would be a person just doing what they love. The other word is dilettante. Today, a dilettante kind of, again, pejorative. It's about a person who flits from one thing to the next, doesn't do anything to perfection, but does lots of different things. And it actually came from the Latin delectare, which is to find delight in. So it referred to someone who enjoyed a given activity. And so, I think that even back then fit me. I'm an amateur and a dilettante. These original meanings of these words drew attention to the experience. It talks about how much you enjoyed, or how you felt about what you were doing. The way they're used today is more words of accomplishment. So like an amateur doesn't rank up there with a professional, or a dilettante doesn't rank with someone who's specialized. So I want to go with the old meanings of the words, because in my experience, how I experience photography, it's something I love and something I take a lot of delight in. So I decided to look back over my 6 years of photography to see what kind of things I take pictures of. So what kind of a photographer am I? Well, I like horses, so I found a lot of horse pictures. I went to rodeos, which a lot of us have done, and really enjoyed watching the horses there. I took a workshop at a ranch, learning to like this one was to just have the motion visible in the legs. It's a panning exercise where you follow the rider, but with a slow shutter speed. So the legs, because they're moving quickly, still shows the motion. So that was a really fun experience, to be on a ranch and photograph horses as well as other things. I went on a wild horse workshop where we followed these horses around in the mountains surrounding Salt Lake City. But I have some pictures of horses because I really like horses, but I'm certainly not known in the club as the person who always photographs horses. And all right, so landscapes, of course, and seascapes, I like that. The Grand Canyon, you just can't beat the Grand Canyon. It was a very interesting workshop. We did a lot of getting up early and staying up late. The Arizona desert was another type of landscape that I really enjoyed. The Oregon coast. This is in the town of Bandon, where they have a group that makes these not sculptures, but these drawings on the beach. There are pathways, which the word, of course, is escaping me right now, where people follow the path around, and it's a form of meditation.
Labyrinth.
Labyrinth, yes, thank you. Yes, so so it's a seascape, but it's also a humanscape of what people have done there. It was fun to watch all these people with their different tools constructing this as the tide was going out, and then watching the tide come back in later and wipe the whole thing out, sort of a form of performance art, or this ephemeral art. And then, landscape in the winter, this is in Yellowstone. But, I wouldn't characterize myself as a landscape photographer. I just do it because I find it really delightful. And well, wild animals, everyone likes wild animals. I'm certainly no Laura Stansfield, but I like to take photos of animals. And so I went to see the polar bears in Churchill, Canada. And I guess it was a little warmer than usual, and that bear was trying to cool himself off, putting his belly on the snow. Went to Yellowstone to see bison. I really wanted a picture of a big bison with snow on him, and I was lucky enough to be able to get that. And then Alaska to see brown bears. And this mama and her cubs, it was really, really fun to watch her go fishing and then bring the fish back for the babies to eat, and hopefully learn by watching her how to go about fishing for themselves when they get a little older. And birds, well, birds are everywhere. This one happens to be an Arctic tern, also from Alaska at this point, although I saw last week I was in Iceland and saw just trillions of terns. They were nesting, and so they were dive bombing any people who dared to come by. But anyway, I enjoy photographing animals, but I don't spend a whole lot of time doing it, except when I'm on a trip where I happen to see something. And then there's close-ups and macro photography. That's kind of it's fun. I like flowers. I like this dead flower really appealed to me, or dying flower. And insects, this dragonfly was in Florida, really beautiful one. I'm certainly no Mark Hollinger, but I like photographing insects. More dead plants. I don't know why dead plants attract me so. And other bugs. But I do it because if I see a bug like that, I want to take a picture of it, but I don't pursue it. I don't know the names of all bugs. I just like how they look. And travel, it's my biggest vice is traveling. And I take a camera and I try to take decent photos. This one here is in Greenland, and that was icebergs are just so amazing. And the icebergs in Greenland, for some reason, seem a lot more pristine looking than the ones that I've seen in Alaska and in Iceland. This one is in India. That was a really fun place to travel. I tend, to take kind of big picture pictures. On this trip, I traveled with Ellen Storrs, who's in our group, and she got a lot of very intimate, personal pictures of people. But I haven't developed that talent, but I do like travel, and I do like to capture my memories of it, so that when I look back, I can remember. And this was a really exciting trip. And I really think they kind of set this up for us, but because this guy was just walking around leading these camels, and the sun was setting. And anyway, if you ran around a little bit, you could find a spot to get an interesting photo. And this is Ireland with their standing stones, and that had astronomical significance. and it points in a direction of either a star or where the sun sets on the solstice, or some of them they can figure out what they were for. This particular one, nobody really knows why they aligned the stones in that particular position. Oh, I really do like things that happen in the sky, like eclipses. A number of people from the club went up to Winnemucca in Nevada to take pictures of this annular solar eclipse. And, it got clouded out for most of us. Some people who really were paying attention, like one person, Bill got a picture of the actual annularity, the whole perfectly, the moon perfectly in the middle of the sun. I got clouds. And, the aurora, that's a real fun sky phenomenon. This wasn't the most extreme display, but it was the best shot I got of it on this particular trip. Oh, comets. A few years back, we had a visible comet, and I was driving all over looking for a place where I could watch the comet. And so I was on the road. I mean, there were houses and stuff, but I got out my tripod and my little chair out of my trunk, and I'm sitting there focusing on the comet. And after about 15, 20 minutes, police car shows up and to kind of ask me, and I think he was a little bit surprised, instead of a prowler or somebody trespassing or whatever, he finds this white-haired person sitting on a stool in front of a camera. But anyway, that's a really nice phenomenon that I really, really enjoyed. And then I see lots of rainbows, and they're fairly common, but this is a fog bow. And the fog does the same kind of displacement, the same kind of refraction of the light, but it's too close, and the size of the particles is such that it doesn't split into colors. And you can see faint colors in it, but fog bows are generally white. Oh, and this is called a sun pillar. And it's because of frozen particles that are hexagonal shaped and are flat. They're in a horizontal position. And so as the sun is setting, it shines on them, and they reflect this pillar of light. I have only seen this twice. The first time was in Greenland, because it's pretty cold there, and you get a lot of ice crystals in the air. And this one was at the Grand Canyon. So I feel pretty lucky to have seen this a couple times. I guess to a certain extent, I do a little bit of chasing of phenomena. I went to Texas to try to see the total solar eclipse, but that was a bust because it got clouded out. And sometimes you really luck out and get two phenomena at the same time, a rainbow and a lightning all at once. Creative is one of our categories. It's not my favorite. I don't feel particularly creative when it comes to photography. It intimidates me quite a bit. But sometimes an idea will pop into my head, and one of the things I do like to do in creatives is what I call nature as abstract. And here's an example of one. This stellar sea lion was swimming through the water, and to me it looked like a comet of the sea. As I recall, I think I gave it a title or something like that. So it's that's the sort of abstract I like. Here's another one. This alligator, I turned it into black and white because it took away the distraction of the color and left just the patterns of, of light and dark. Anyway. And then sometimes it's just animals. I took this picture of dolphins and kind of messed with it in some of the color shifting programs. I think this was Color Effects Pro that I used on this to kind of exaggerate the colors here of these dolphins. And this is actually one of the first photos I ever tried to use for the creative, and just all the distortion. I tried to crop it so that when you first look at it, you're not quite sure what it is, and it takes a moment to figure out that it's a car. It's just shiny sports car with lots of dirt on it from being left outside. Just the way that it distorted all the reflections and buildings around it really appealed to me. And then every once in a while, I don't have a good relationship with Photoshop. It intimidates me. It can do a lot of things. So every once in a while, I will try to do a composite, which I did with this one. And, I like it. It may not be perfect in terms of what a composite is supposed to do, but I like it anyway. Oh yeah, and storm chasing. Storm chasing is my latest thing that I have decided I'd love to do. So the past 2 years, I've gone on storm chasing trips. The first one was chasing thunderstorms out of Tucson, Arizona, and learned to use a lightning detector, and that was really fun. It's a lot of driving around chasing storms, and then this year, that's another one from thunderstorms. The trick was to get in there and get your photos and jump back in the van before you got too wet. But the trip that I took just a few months ago was looking for tornadoes. Now, this was a big storm cell, but it didn't seem to produce a tornado that we could see. But at one point, we really did spot a tornado, kind of emerging from one of these clouds or these storm cells. And black and white. Black and white's been very interesting to me. I took a class on black and white. Yeah, I never really thought much about it because in Lightroom or most programs, you can click a button and turn something into black and white. And I just felt like that was how you did black and white photography. But this particular instructor that I had really made me look at it a different way. So these early photos like this is pretty much what I did. I just turned it to black and white. And since the colors were not important here, I was pleased how this one turned out. And here's one of a scene in Canada. The people who live there on the tundra don't have many landmarks, and so they have to construct landmarks. And apparently, there's a language. I mean, they're placing rocks in certain position, points the direction to different, like good hunting grounds or a meeting place or whatever. But anyway, this was a generic Inukchuk, they're called. And Inukchuks, I didn't ever go into learning all about Inukchuks and what the different rocks would mean and what what it was pointing at. But I did find them really pleasant to look at. I don't tend to photograph people too often, but this one really appealed to me. This man helping his young daughter up on this rock, and with the waves crashing all around them. And I like that. I would have left it in color, except the man had on some really horrendous orange shirt, and the little girl had some garishly pink tights on. And anyway, black and white seemed to be a much better way to focus on their interaction rather than what they were wearing. And this cactus was close to sunset, and so the shadows on it were really, really nice. And you know, cactus are something I really like to photograph. Anyway, I read a couple books about black and white because I was really thinking I might want to do this whole presentation about black and white. And so these are quotes from Michael Freeman, who's a well-known photographer, his book, Black and White Photography. What sets black and white apart from color, it is not the way we see the world, and it doesn't pretend to represent reality. It began as a necessity, then became accepted as normal, and now it's a creative choice. If by some fluke of science, photography had started with full color, would black and white ever have evolved? I still don't know. I don't know that there is an answer to that. I don't know. Maybe if a person started messing around with desaturating this color or that color and finally desaturated everything, maybe it would have gotten invented. But that's not how it happened. It's an interesting evolution, you know, that the only way they could photograph was black and white. That was what the chemistry allowed them at that time. And then everyone just came to accept that. And now people, like, if it isn't black and white, some people don't think of it as art. And so, you know, it's a creative choice if you want to kind of be more artistic about how you're doing something. Anyway, so who knows whether it would have been invented or not, but that's not the way the world happened. So anyway, in the class, the black and white class that I took, the instructor talked to us about what is black and white photography when all of our cameras shoot in color. And so here's a picture that's pretty much black and white, but it's a color photo, and you can see different shades of color. And this polar bear is just walking along, minding his own business. And so if I were to just desaturate that polar bear, this is what I would get. So you can see it's a subtle difference, but so that's the desaturated photo. But if you desaturate, if you look in Lightroom on the panel where you have all the different colors, you can desaturate each color, bring the slider down to 0. That's the hue section. Then there's the luminance section, how bright each color is. Well, you can keep it as monochrome, you're just totally desaturated, but you can change how much luminance is assigned to each color. So this photo, polar bears, although you think of them as white, they're not truly white. They're actually a yellow color, as you can see on the original one. So they have a yellow. In fact, the guide said, when you're trying to spot a polar bear, you look for something that looks like potato chip color. And so when you desaturate it, it certainly becomes a shade of gray. But if you just get rid of all the yellow luminance, you can see what a change that makes, because there really is a lot of yellow in that polar bear's coat. And so if you then, on the other hand, really brought the luminance of the yellow up as high as it would go, then the bear appears much brighter. So this is with no yellow luminance, and this is with 100% yellow luminance. You can try the same thing with blue. If you take away all the blue luminance, or you lower it as much as it'll lower, both the bear and the background appear much darker because the blue sky reflects off of both of them. If, on the other hand, you brought the luminance of the blue all the way up to 100%, you get a totally different kind of picture here. Because the blue from the snow is really reflected a lot. And so that appears almost pure white. Whereas the polar bear, it appears brighter than it did here, but because it's really got a lot of yellow and it doesn't quite reflect the blue the way that that the snow does. Anyway, I decided to try this situation with things that had actual color rather than a polar bear on snow. So a rose that was growing in my front yard. The first one is color, obviously. This one next to it is desaturated. The third one is if I brought the orange luminance all the way up as high as it would go, you can see how much brighter that makes the rose. And then I tried it with yellow, and yellow gives it a whole different look. It's kind of interesting to me that the orange and the yellow, even though both colors are in there, it's a very different look to it. When you put the green luminance way up, notice the color of the leaves. The leaves are kind of gray. They're pretty similar with the other three that came before it, but it makes the leaves almost white to increase the green luminance. And the blue luminance, actually the blue luminance looks pretty similar to just a desaturated picture. So anyway, that's another example of how you can manipulate things. And one of the reasons this is really an interesting thing to know is that generally when you're looking for something to do in black and white, you're looking for something that's high contrast. But if there is a color difference, you can use that color to increase the contrast by increasing the luminance or decreasing the luminance of the color to make it stand out from the other things in the photo. So it's a good thing to have in your bag of tricks if you really want to do a monochrome photo, but the thing that you're photographing doesn't have a whole lot of contrast. Anyway, actually, let me just go back here. So after looking back at 6 or 7 years of photography, I still can't say what kind of a photographer I am. I do a little bit of everything. And so I've decided that the kind of photographer that I am is a dilettante photographer. And I've been a dilettante all my life. There's no particular reason to stop being a dilettante now. And I've stopped trying to make myself want to just perfect one type of photography, and I will just continue to do a little bit of anything that delights me, and just be happy with it. And so I'm an amateur and I'm a dilettante, and that's just how it is. So one of the ways, though, that I want to improve what I am doing, no matter what kind of photographs I take, is through post-processing. I have a bit of a bad relationship with technology in general, Photoshop in particular. It's every class I've taken we've learned like 12 ways to do the same thing. And it just gets too confusing and all the different layers and whatever. Every once in a while, I'll use it because it does things that Lightroom can't do. But Lightroom has been getting really, really more sophisticated in the last few years. And so I thought I would just go over some of the new things that have happened. Particularly might be useful for people who aren't used to doing post-processing at all. But I've had cameras all my life, but there've always been point and shoot cameras that shoot JPEG where the camera does the processing. And it's a whole different ballgame to make your own decisions of how you want something to look. And so mostly I started out with Lightroom where I would use the basic panel and do global adjustments. A global adjustment affects the whole photograph. It doesn't just pick out one area or another to work on. You can make the whole thing brighter, you can make the whole thing darker, you can increase the contrast, you can increase the clarity, you can lots of different things you can do to make the whole photograph look better. You can do a little bit of manipulating by using the shadows. You can brighten up the shadows but not touch the rest of the photo, or you can tone down the highlights or bring up the highlights without affecting the rest of the photo. But you can't, if you say you had a picture of an animal, you can't just do the shadows on the animal and leave the background the way it is. You have to do the whole thing. But with this masking panel that is now in Lightroom, you get to choose what kind of things, what you want to affect with your changes. So even in the older Lightroom, you could use a brush, what used to be called a selection brush. The brush, you click on the brush tool, you tell it you want to make a mask using the brush. Here's the brush number 1. And then you would go about trying to carefully outline the parts. Suppose that you wanted to just make that pink brighter. But as you can see here, you tend to go outside the lines a little bit or inside the lines a little bit. And so if you were to do that and then change, say, how bright it is or how dark it is or whatever, you'd have little artifacts. It would look unnatural. It would look, but there is a really neat little thing now in Lightroom, and it's called Auto Mask. Now, I ignored it for a long time because I didn't know what it meant. But what it does is that you take your cursor after you've chosen that tool, and you place it on what you want, and you click it there, and then you start moving it around to paint just that in it. And what it does is it keeps the mask from going anywhere that isn't that color that you've chosen for the first thing. And so after you get the whole thing painted, it only takes a brief amount of time. You don't have to worry. You don't have to be excessively careful about how you're doing this. You can just go over the whole thing, and it will all be masked. And then you can do with that mask what you want. You can change the color, you can brighten the color, you can dim the color, you can make it have more clarity, you can make whatever, the same things that you can do in the basic panel, you can also do in the masking panel, but you're only affecting just what you've masked. See in here, the background stays blurred, but you can do this and cause these to become sharper or crisper, or however you want to make it. And you can choose a tool and ask it to make a selection. But sometimes the machine doesn't do it correctly. So here you have, this is a raw photo that hasn't been worked on. And it's, it's kind of dull looking, and what I wanted to do was make it pop more. So I picked the tool that said sky. Well, sky is one of the tools that uses AI, artificial intelligence, to pick out what it thinks you're looking for. But with this one, because there's not much difference between the sky and the water, it just thought the whole thing was sky. So that didn't work. So that mask. So there's you just hit there, when you're doing it in real life, there are like 3 dots here you hit, and you can just delete the mask. So you delete the mask and start over again. Or what I did in this case, instead of delete the mask, I chose subtract, because I didn't want the water to be affected. So I chose subtract, and I chose to subtract. Then you choose any of the tools you want. Choose a brush. Because this is a straight line, this horizon is pretty straight, you can just use the subtract brush like an eraser. Just erase all of this down here and just keep the mask on the sky. And so the next step is, the sky was kind of dull looking, but I could see that there was a cloud there that would stand out if I could just make it brighter. But if we brighten the whole thing, it still doesn't look like anything. So what I needed to do here was to just select this white cloud. And the way that I did that was selecting a tool called luminance range. There are 2 range tools. One says luminance and one says color. So the luminance range, when you click that tool, your cursor isn't an arrow anymore. It becomes a little like an eyedropper. And what it is a sampler. So you pick the spot that you want and you click there, and then oh, that's going on. I'm sorry. All right. So using luminance and color range masking was how I did this. So I have the mask on the sky. I picked the cloud, luminance range 1. When you do that, I've got all my people over here. I'm going to move them. All right. So once you've chosen that range, now you have a refining tool. This thing over here has 2 parts to it when you use a luminance mask. This part to the far right will show you how much you'll choose how wide a band of color you want to choose. And so as you move this back and forth, you'll see the cloud will show more or less. This other part here to the left, it's how much feathering. So how sharply do you want it? Well, since this particular cloud does not have sharp edges, I let the luminance range, let the feathering be fairly broad. Okay. So now I was able to brighten this cloud and a little bit of that cloud and make it stand out more from the rest of the sky. Another thing I was able to do, which I didn't, I didn't take screenshots of everything that I did. I was able to choose to invert this and not do the cloud, but do the rest of the sky, and use the color temperature to go from this temperature, and made it more blue because the sky and the water were so similar. So I was able to make the sky a bluer color by changing the temperature of just that area. Now there's the foreground. And the foreground in that particular photo was very bright green. And sometimes in photographs, even though it's the way it's showing, but the green looks kind of fake in the photo, even though truly the grass was that green. But one of the things I learned in some class or other that I took was that if you want to tone down the green, you can use the magenta color. So when you look at the shadows, when you go to the temperature, there's temperature, which goes between the blue and the yellow. Then there's tint, which goes between green and magenta. And so you can add a little bit more magenta to the parts that are really bright green and tone it down a little bit so that it doesn't seem fake. It's funny to make something fake so that it doesn't look fake, but that's kind of how things are. Anyway, so those are the tools used by themselves or with just some adding and subtracting. But the tool that I hadn't heard about before and really learned to use I earlier this year, there was like a week-long program called Lightroom Summit. And they do this every year. And I had never heard of it before, but someone mentioned it to me and I looked at it. And it was for 5 days in a row. They had 15 instructors, and each instructor taught 3 different classes, hour-long classes. So during this week, there were 45 hours worth of programming on different aspects of Lightroom. It's pretty amazing that they can do that many hours just on Lightroom, but each class was different and each one was very interesting. You could either do it for free, but if it was for free, you had to watch everything within 2 days of when it was broadcast. If you paid the $99, you were able to have access, forever to those classes. And so I chose to do that, and I have that 45 hours of instruction available. And one of the classes on that Lightroom Summit had to do with this intersect. And it's a way to make selections inside of selections. So this was one day I was hiking by Goat Rock, which you can see to the far left there. And there were these people with hang gliders ready to jump off the cliff. So I thought this would be a good way to demonstrate this intersect. So what I did was selected the subject. For the subject, it picked the actual hang glider and the man. But I didn't want to do the man, so I subtracted him by selecting subtract and using a brush and just erased him so that he wasn't included anymore. Then I chose this blue color using the color range. Did a color range, chose the blue, and so that became selected. And then just to demonstrate how it works, so you're selecting something within the selection. So you selected the subject here, and now you're selecting just the blue part of the subject. And then I used the hue, which is down here, to change the color and made that blue become green. So it's an easy way to do a color substitution. I could have also tried just making the blue more luminance or more saturated or brighter or duller. Anyway, but I just chose, this seemed more dramatic to change the whole thing. So this is a really neat tool to do selections within selections. Okay, so the question is, what's next? And so I have a couple things on my list that I really want to do. And the first one is to learn that. First one is I want to learn to print. And there are a few people in this club who already know how to print. And so I'm going to try to work with them to really do this. I did the easy part. I bought a printer. Now I have this monster printer sitting in my office, and I have absolutely no idea why sometimes when I try to print something, it comes out fine, and sometimes the color is way off. So I have a long way to go on that. I was actually able to print in a large format, one photo that I have submitted to the county fair in Santa Rosa. So if you should happen to go to the fair, into the adult photography section, you will see a color photo of a huge storm cell that I did as a panorama. I did 5 photos, stitched them all together, cropped it, straightened it, did a whole bunch of stuff to it. And then I printed it and mounted it and put it into the fair. And we'll see what they think of it. Actually, some of you may have seen that photo because that was my entry into the pictorial section of the last competition that we had. So printing, that's one big thing. And the other thing, I was talking to some people before the meeting actually started. I took some phone video of a whale watching encounter that was just incredible. There were 3 whales. I think there were 2 adult females and 1 calf, a pretty much grown calf. And then in the middle of filming these 3 coming to the surface and coming up and disappearing and up and down, I started to see weird little flashes. It turns out it was a bunch of dolphins who came to play too. And so they kept leaping in and out of my film. And then as a grand finale, the whales did their big arching dive, and then in succession, 1, 2, and then 3 tails. So what I need to do though is cut out all the dead parts where nothing was happening. So that's after learning to print, I want to learn how to edit videos, because that could be another interest, I think, to do, to delight myself. Okay, so that's where I've been. This is where I want to go. I hope that at least some of you found something to explore in the post-processing or black and white process that I've learned. And that is essentially where I am. A dilettante who keeps finding new things to want to do, but never getting caught up in any one of them because it's just so much fun to flit from one thing to the next. Anyway, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was great.
Wow.
Thanks.
That's
Fantastic.
great. Woohoo!
Seems like you've excelled at almost
Oh,
everything you
everything.
tried.
I
Yeah.
forgot to tell you, looking at what I plan to try to do, that's how it makes my head feel. Okay, so now I think I unshare, stop share. Okay,
Ta-da.
ta-da.
Ta-da, that was
Very
very
nice.
good.
Very
Very
nice.
nice.
You are a master.